Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe for more. A report to an academy by Franz Kafka. Honored members of the academy, you have done me the honor of inviting me to give your academy an account of the life I formerly led as an ape. I regret that I cannot comply with your request to the extent you desire. It is now nearly 5 years since I was an ape, a short space of time, perhaps, according to the calendar, but an infinitely long time to gallop through at full speed, as I have done, more or less accompanied by excellent mentors, good advice, applause, and orchestral music, and yet essentially alone, since all my escorters, to keep the image, kept well off the course. I could never have achieved what I have done had I been stubbornly set on clinging to my origins, to the remembrances of my youth. In fact, to give up being stubborn was the supreme commandment I laid upon myself. Free ape as I was, I submitted myself to that yoke. In revenge, however, my memory of the past has closed the door against me more and more. I could have returned at first, had human beings allowed it, through an archway as wide as the span of heaven over the earth, but as I spurred myself on in my forced career, the opening narrowed and shrank behind me. I felt more comfortable in the world of men and fitted it better. The strong wind that blew after me out of my past began to slacken. Today it is only a gentle puff of air that plays around my heels, and the opening in the distance, through which it comes and through which I once came myself, has grown so small that, even if my strength and my willpower sufficed to get me back to it, I should have to scrape the very skin from my body to crawl through. To put it plainly, much as I like expressing myself in images, to put it plainly, your life as apes, gentlemen, insofar as something of that kind lies behind you, cannot be farther removed from you than mine is from me. Yet everyone on earth feels a tickling at the heels, the small chimpanzee and the great Achilles alike. But to a lesser extent I can perhaps meet your demand, and indeed I do so with the greatest pleasure. The first thing I learned was to give a handshake. A handshake betokens frankness. Well, today, now that I stand at the very peak of my career, I hope to add frankness in words to the frankness of that first handshake. What I have to tell the Academy will contribute nothing essentially new, and will fall far behind what you have asked of me and what with the best will in the world I cannot communicate. Nonetheless, it should indicate the line an erstwhile ape has had to follow in entering and establishing himself in the world of men. Yet I could not risk putting into words even such insignificant information as I am going to give you if I were not quite sure of myself and if my position on all the great variety stages of the civilized world had not become quite unassailable. I belong to the Gold Coast. For the story of my capture I must depend on the evidence of others. A hunting expedition sent out by the firm of Hagenbeck, by the way. I have drunk many a bottle of good red wine since then with the leader of that expedition, had taken up its position in the bushes by the shore when I came down for a drink at evening among a troop of apes. They shot at us. I was the only one that was hit. I was hit in 2 places. Once in the cheek, a slight wound, but it left a large, naked, red scar which earned me the name of Red Peter, a horrible name, utterly inappropriate, which only some ape could have thought of, as if the only difference between me and the performing ape Peter, who died not so long ago and had some small local reputation, were the red mark on my cheek. This by the way. The second shot hit me below the hip. It was a severe wound. It is the cause of my limping a little to this day. I read an article recently by one of the 10,000 windbags who vent themselves concerning me in the newspapers, saying, my ape nature is not yet quite under control, the proof being that when visitors come to see me, I have a predilection for taking down my trousers to show them where the shot went in. The hand which wrote that should have its fingers shot away one by one. As for me, I can take my trousers down before anyone if I like. You would find nothing but a well-groomed fur and the scar made. Let me be particular in the choice of a word for this particular purpose, to avoid misunderstanding, the scar made by a wanton shot. Everything is open and above board, there is nothing to conceal. When the plain truth is in question, Great minds discard the niceties of refinement. But if the writer of the article were to take down his trousers before a visitor, that would be quite another story, and I will let it stand to his credit that he does not do it. In return, let him leave me alone with his delicacy. After these 2 shots I came to myself, and this is where my own memories gradually begin, between decks in the Hagenbeck steamer, inside a cage. It was not a 4-sided barred cage, it was only a 3-sided cage nailed to a locker. The locker made the 4th side of it. The whole construction was too low for me to stand up in and too narrow to sit down in. So I had to squat with my knees bent and trembling all the time, and also, since probably for a time I wished to see no one, and to stay in the dark, my face was turned toward the locker while the bars of the cage cut into my flesh behind. Such a method of confining wild beasts is supposed to have its advantages during the first days of captivity, and out of my own experiences I cannot deny that from the human point of view this is really the case. But that did not occur to me then. For the first time in my life I could see no way out, at least no direct way out. Directly in front of me was the locker, board fitted close to board. True, there was a gap running right through the boards which I greeted with the blissful howl of ignorance when I first discovered it, but the hole was not even wide enough to stick one's tail through, and not all the strength of an ape could enlarge it. I am supposed to have made uncommonly little noise, as I was later informed, from which the conclusion was drawn that I would either soon die, or if I managed to survive the first critical period would be very amenable to training. I did survive this period. Hopelessly sobbing, painfully hunting for fleas, apathetically licking a coconut, beating my skull against the locker, sticking out my tongue at anyone who came near me. That was how I filled in time at first in my new life. But over and above it all only the one feeling, no way out. Of course what I felt then as an ape I can represent now only in human terms, and therefore I must represent it, but although I cannot reach back to the truth of the old ape life, there is no doubt that it lies somewhere in the direction I have indicated. Until then I had had so many ways out of everything, and now I had none. I was pinned down. Had I been nailed down, my right to free movement would not have been lessened. Why so? Scratch your flesh raw between your toes, but you won't find the answer. Press yourself against the bar behind you till it nearly cuts you in two, you won't find the answer. I had no way out, but I had to devise one, for without it I could not live. All the time facing that locker, I should certainly have perished. Yet as far as Hagenbeck was concerned, the place for apes was in front of a locker. Well then, I had to stop being an ape. A fine, clear train of thought, which I must have constructed somehow with my belly, since apes think with their bellies. I fear that perhaps you do not quite understand what I mean by way out. I use the expression in its fullest and most popular sense. I deliberately do not use the word freedom. I do not mean the spacious feeling of freedom on all sides. As an ape, perhaps, I knew that, and I have met men who yearn for it. But for my part I desired such freedom neither then nor now. In passing, may I say that all too often men are betrayed by the word freedom. And as freedom is counted among the most sublime feelings, so the corresponding disillusionment can be also sublime. In variety theaters I have often watched, before my turn came on, a couple of acrobats performing on trapezes high in the roof. They swung themselves, they rocked to and fro, they sprang into the air, they floated into each other's arms, one hung by the hair from the teeth of the other. And that too is human freedom, I thought, self-controlled movement. What a mockery of Holy Mother Nature! Were the apes to see such a spectacle, no theater walls could stand the shock of their laughter. No, freedom was not what I wanted. Only a way out, right or left, or in any direction. I made no other demand, even should the way out prove to be an illusion. The demand was a small one, the disappointment could be no bigger. To get out somewhere, to get out. Only not to stay motionless with raised arms, crushed against a wooden wall. Today I can see it clearly. Without the most profound inward calm I could never have found my way out. And indeed perhaps I owe all that I have become to the calm that settled within me after my first few days in the ship. And again for that calmness it was the ship's crew I had to thank. They were good creatures, in spite of everything. I find it still pleasant to remember the sound of their heavy footfalls which used to echo through my half-dreaming head. They had a habit of doing everything as slowly as possible. If one of them wanted to rub his eyes, he lifted a hand as if it were a drooping weight. Their jests were coarse, but hearty. Their laughter had always a gruff bark in it that sounded dangerous but meant nothing. They always had something in their mouths to spit out and did not care where they spat it. They always grumbled that they got fleas from me, yet they were not seriously angry about it. They knew that my fur fostered fleas, and that fleas jump. It was a simple matter of fact to them. When they were off duty some of them often used to sit down in a semicircle around me. They hardly spoke but only grunted to each other, smoked their pipes, stretched out on lockers, smacked their knees as soon as I made the slightest movement, and now and then one of them would take a stick and tickle me where I liked being tickled. If I were to be invited today to take a cruise on that ship I should certainly refuse the invitation. But just as certainly the memories I could recall between its decks would not all be hateful. The calmness I acquired among these people kept me above all from trying to escape. As I look back now, it seems to me I must have had at least an inkling that I had to find a way out or die, but that my way out could not be reached through flight. I cannot tell now whether escape was possible, but I believe it must have been. For an ape it must always be possible. With my teeth as they are today I have to be careful even in simply cracking nuts, but at that time I could certainly have managed by degrees to bite through the lock of my cage. I did not do it. What good would it have done me? As soon as I had poked out my head I should have been caught again and put in a worse cage, or I might have slipped among the other animals without being noticed, among the pythons, say, who were opposite me, and so breathed out my life in their embrace. Or supposing I had actually succeeded in sneaking out as far as the deck and leaping overboard, I should have rocked for a little on the deep sea and then been drowned. Desperate remedies. I did not think it out in this human way, but under the influence of my surroundings I acted as if I had thought it out. I did not think things out, but I observed everything quietly. I watched these men go to and fro, always the same faces, the same movements. Often it seemed to me there was only the same man. So this man or these men walked about unimpeded. A lofty goal faintly dawned before me. No one promised me that if I became like them the bars of my cage would be taken away. Such promises for apparently impossible contingencies are not given. But if one achieves the impossible, the promises appear later retrospectively precisely where one had looked in vain for them before. Now, these men in themselves had no great attraction for me. Had I been devoted to the aforementioned idea of freedom, I should certainly have preferred the deep sea to the way out that suggested itself in the heavy faces of these men. At any rate, I watched them for a long time before I even thought of such things. Indeed, it was only the mass weight of my observations that impelled me in the right direction. It was so easy to imitate these people. I learned to spit in the very first days. We used to spit in each other's faces, the only difference was that I licked my face clean afterwards and they did not. I could soon smoke a pipe like an old hand, and if I also pressed my thumb into the bowl of the pipe, a roar of appreciation went up between decks, only it took me a very long time to understand the difference between a full pipe and an empty one. My worst trouble came from the schnapps bottle. The smell of it revolted me. I forced myself to it as best I could, but it took weeks for me to master my repulsion. This inward conflict, strangely enough, was taken more seriously by the crew than anything else about me. I cannot distinguish the men from each other in my recollection, but there was one of them who came again and again, alone or with friends, by day, by night, at all kinds of hours. He would post himself before me with the bottle and give me instructions. He could not understand me, he wanted to solve the enigma of my being. He would slowly uncork the bottle and then look at me to see if I had followed him, I admit that I always watched him with wildly eager, too eager attention, such a student of humankind no human teacher ever found on earth. After the bottle was uncorked, he lifted it to his mouth. I followed it with my eyes right up to his jaws. He would nod, pleased with me, and set the bottle to his lips. I, enchanted with my gradual enlightenment, squealed and scratched myself comprehensively wherever scratching was called for. He rejoiced, tilted the bottle, and took a drink. I, impatient and desperate to emulate him, befouled myself in my cage, which again gave him great satisfaction, and then, holding the bottle at arm's length and bringing it up with a swing, he would empty it at one draught, leaning back at an exaggerated angle for my better instruction. I, exhausted by too much effort, could follow him no farther and hung limply to the bars, while he ended his theoretical exposition by rubbing his belly and grinning. After theory came practice. Was I not already quite exhausted by my theoretical instruction? Indeed I was, utterly exhausted. That was part of my destiny. And yet I would take hold of the proffered bottle as well as I was able, uncork it, trembling. This successful action would gradually inspire me with new energy. I would lift the bottle, already following my original model almost exactly, put it to my lips and then throw it down in disgust, utter disgust, although it was empty and filled only with the smell of the spirit, throw it down on the floor in disgust. To the sorrow of my teacher, to the greater sorrow of myself, neither of us being really comforted by the fact that I did not forget, even though I had thrown away the bottle, to rub my belly most admirably and to grin. Far too often my lesson ended in that way. And to the credit of my teacher, he was not angry. Sometimes indeed he would hold his burning pipe against my fur, until it began to smolder in some place I could not easily reach, but then he would himself extinguish it with his own kind, enormous hand. He was not angry with me. He perceived that we were both fighting on the same side against the nature of apes and that I had the more difficult task. What a triumph it was then both for him and for me, when one evening before a large circle of spectators, perhaps there was a celebration of some kind, a gramophone was playing, an officer was circulating among the crew, when on this evening, just as no one was looking, I took hold of a schnapps bottle that had been carelessly left standing before my cage, uncorked it in the best style, while the company began to watch me with mounting attention, set it to my lips without hesitation, with no grimace, like a professional drinker, with rolling eyes and full throat, actually and truly drank it empty, then threw the bottle away, not this time in despair but as an artistic performer, forgot, indeed, to rub my belly, but instead of that, because I could not help it, because my senses were reeling, called a brief and unmistakable hello. Breaking into human speech, and with this outburst broke into the human community, and felt its echo. Listen, he's talking. Like a caress over the whole of my sweat-drenched body. I repeat, there was no attraction for me in imitating human beings. I imitated them because I needed a way out, and for no other reason. And even that triumph of mine did not achieve much. I lost my human voice again at once. It did not come back for months. My aversion for the schnapps bottle returned again with even greater force. But the line I was to follow had in any case been decided, once for all. When I was handed over to my first trainer in Hamburg, I soon realized that there were two alternatives before me, the zoological gardens or the variety stage. I did not hesitate. I said to myself, do your utmost to get onto the variety stage. The zoological gardens means only a new cage. Once there, you're done for. And so I learned things, gentlemen. One learns when one has to, one learns when one needs a way out, one learns at all costs. One stands over oneself with a whip, one flays oneself at the slightest opposition. My ape nature fled out of me, head over heels and away, so that my first teacher was almost himself turned into an ape by it, had soon to give up teaching and was taken away to a mental hospital. Fortunately he was soon let out again. But I used up many teachers, indeed, several teachers at once. As I became more confident of my abilities, as the public took an interest in my progress and my future began to look bright, I engaged teachers for myself, established them in 5 communicating rooms, and took lessons from them all at once by dint of leaping from one room to the other. That progress of mine! How the rays of knowledge penetrated from all sides into my awakening brain! I do not deny it, I found it exhilarating. But I must also confess, I did not overestimate it, not even then, much less now. With an effort which up till now has never been repeated, I managed to reach the cultural level of an average European. In itself that might be nothing to speak of, but it is something insofar as it has helped me out of my cage and opened a special way out for me, the way of humanity. There is an excellent idiom, to fight one's way through the thick of things. That is what I have done. I have fought through the thick of things. There was nothing else for me to do, provided always that freedom was not to be my choice. As I look back over my development and survey what I have achieved so far, I do not complain, but I am not complacent either. With my hands in my trouser pockets, my bottle of wine on the table, I half lie and half sit in my rocking chair and gaze out of the window. If a visitor arrives, I receive him with propriety. My manager sits in the anteroom. When I ring, he comes and listens to what I have to say. Nearly every evening I give a performance, and I have a success that could hardly be increased. When I come home late at night from banquets, from scientific receptions, from social gatherings, there sits waiting for me a half-trained little chimpanzee, and I take comfort from her as apes do. By day I cannot bear to see her, for she has the insane look of the bewildered half-broken animal in her eye. No one else sees it, but I do, and I cannot bear it. On the whole, at any rate, I have achieved what I set out to achieve. But do not tell me that it was not worth the trouble. In any case, I am not appealing for any man's verdict, I am only imparting knowledge, I am only making a report. To you also, honored members of the Academy, I have only made a report. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe for more.